Genesis chapter 25 verse 1. Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Context. To understand this verse fully, it's important to examine the context in which it appears. Genesis chapter 25 recounts the events after the death of Sarah, Abraham's wife. It focuses on the later years of Abraham's life, including his marriage to Keturah and the subsequent descendants born to him. Abraham's second marriage. After Sarah's passing, Abraham took another wife named Keturah. It is noteworthy that Keturah is introduced as a wife, signifying a marriage relationship. This demonstrates that Abraham desired companionship and to continue his lineage even in his later years. Identity of Keturah. The verse mentions the name Keturah as Abraham's second wife. However, the Bible does not provide much information about Keturah herself, aside from her name. Some scholars suggest that Keturah may have been a concubine or a secondary wife, but the exact nature of their relationship is not explicitly stated. Significance. The inclusion of this verse highlights that Abraham's life continued beyond his relationship with Sarah. It underscores his desire for a family and the fulfillment of God's promise to make him the father of many nations. Genesis chapter 17 verses 4 through 6. Through this marriage, Abraham further extended his family lineage and descendants. Descendants of Abraham and Keturah. Subsequent verses in Genesis chapter 25 verses 2 through 4 provide a list of 6 sons born to Abraham and Keturah: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. These sons went on to become the heads of various Arabian tribes, with their descendants eventually spreading throughout the region. Spiritual lessons. While the focus of this verse is on Abraham's marriage to Keturah, there are broader spiritual lessons we can derive from it. It reminds us that God's promises extend beyond any single relationship or event in our lives. It highlights Abraham's faithfulness and willingness to trust God's plan, even in his later years. Additionally, it emphasizes the importance of continuing to walk in obedience to God's call and purpose throughout our lives. In summary, Genesis chapter 25 verse 1 introduces Abraham's second wife, Keturah, marking a new chapter in his life. This verse demonstrates Abraham's desire for companionship and the fulfillment of God's promise to make him the father of many nations. It also sets the stage for the subsequent listing of their sons, who became the heads of Arabian tribes. Overall, this verse showcases Abraham's faithfulness and provides valuable lessons about God's continued faithfulness and the importance of obedience throughout our lives. Genesis chapter 25 verse 2. And she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. Genesis chapter 25 verse 2 is a verse that provides a genealogical account of the descendants of Abraham through his wife Keturah. It serves as a bridge between the previous chapter, where the death and burial of Sarah are recorded, and the subsequent events in the life of Abraham. In this verse, the focus is on the children born to Abraham and Keturah. Keturah is described as the mother of 6 sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. These sons represent additional branches of Abraham's descendants beyond his firstborn son, Ishmael, and his promised son, Isaac. It is noteworthy that the Bible does not provide extensive details about the lives and actions of Abraham's descendants through Keturah. Their mention in this verse primarily serves to acknowledge their existence and their place in the lineage of Abraham. The subsequent verses in Genesis chapter 25 continue to outline the descendants of each of these sons, tracing their lineages and the lands they inhabited. The emphasis on genealogy in the Bible serves multiple purposes, including establishing historical connections, validating promises and prophecies, and illustrating the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham. Overall, Genesis chapter 25 verse 2 highlights the expansive nature of Abraham's descendants and foreshadows the multitude of nations that would come from him, in accordance with God's promise to make him the father of many nations. Genesis chapter 17 verses 4 through 6. Genesis chapter 25 verse 3. And Jokshan begat Sheba, and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, and Letashim, and Lumim. Genesis chapter 25 verse 3 is a brief verse that is part of the genealogical record of Abraham's descendants. It specifically focuses on the lineage of Abraham's grandson, Jokshan. Let's explore this verse in its context and draw some key insights from it. Context: Genesis chapter 25 provides an account of the later years of Abraham's life and the genealogy of his descendants. In the preceding verses, we learn that Abraham took another wife named Keturah after the death of Sarah. Keturah bore him 6 sons, and Genesis chapter 25 verse 3 mentions 2 of the sons of Jokshan, namely Sheba and Dedan. The verse also highlights the 3 sons of Dedan, Ashurim, Letashim, and Lumim. Jokshan and his descendants. Jokshan was one of the 6 sons of Abraham and Keturah. While the Bible does not provide extensive details about Jokshan himself, his lineage is mentioned here. Sheba and Dedan, his 2 sons, went on to establish significant nations. Sheba is associated with a region in southern Arabia, while Dedan is believed to have inhabited an area in northern Arabia. The sons of Dedan. The verse specifically lists 3 sons of Dedan, Ashurim, Letashim, and Lumim. These names likely refer to distinct tribal groups or clans that descended from Dedan. Their specific historical and geographical identities are not clearly known from biblical sources, as they do not play prominent roles elsewhere in the biblical narrative. Significance: the inclusion of these names in the genealogical record highlights the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 17 verses 4 through 6, where God assured him that he would become the father of many nations. Through Jokshan's descendants, Abraham's lineage continued to multiply, indicating the fulfillment of God's covenant. Though the verse itself may appear relatively unremarkable compared to other passages in the Bible, it serves as a testament to the faithfulness of God in fulfilling His promises. It underscores the significance of genealogical records in establishing the ancestral line leading up to Jesus Christ, who ultimately fulfills the messianic promises given to Abraham. In summary, Genesis chapter 25 verse 3 provides a glimpse into the lineage of Abraham's grandson, Jokshan, specifically mentioning the names of his 2 sons, Sheba and Dedan, and the 3 sons of Dedan, Ashurim, Letashim, and Lumim. While the verse itself may seem less significant, it contributes to the overall narrative of God's faithfulness in fulfilling His promises and establishing the ancestral line leading to Jesus Christ. Genesis chapter 25 verse 4, "And the sons of Midian, Ephah, and Epher, and Hanok, and Abidah, and Eldar. All these were the children of Keturah." Genesis chapter 25 verse 4 is a verse found in the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible. This verse is a part of the genealogy of Abraham, where it mentions the sons of Abraham and Keturah, who was Abraham's wife after the death of Sarah. Let's delve deeper into the context and significance of this verse within the broader narrative of the Bible. Background: Genesis chapter 25 verses 1 through 4 provides a summary of Abraham's life after the death of Sarah. It states that Abraham took another wife named Keturah, and she bore him 6 sons. These sons are listed in Genesis chapter 25 verse 4, Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abidah, and Eldar. Abraham and Keturah. After Sarah's death, Abraham marries Keturah. This marriage took place in Abraham's later years, and through this union, Abraham became the father of 6 more sons. Keturah is believed to be a concubine or a secondary wife, as the primary covenant relationship and the heir of Abraham's promises remained with Sarah and Isaac. Descendants of Keturah. The sons mentioned in Genesis chapter 25 verse 4 are the descendants of Keturah. While the Bible does not provide detailed information about these individuals, their names are recorded to acknowledge their existence and their lineage from Abraham. It is worth noting that the descendants of Keturah went on to form separate tribes or groups, distinct from the line of Isaac and Jacob. Symbolic significance. The mention of the sons of Keturah serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness to fulfill His promise of making Abraham the father of many nations. Through Isaac, the line of Abraham continued, leading to the nation of Israel. However, The inclusion of Keturah's descendants acknowledges that God's blessings extended beyond the confines of Isaac's lineage. Furthermore, this verse emphasizes the importance of recording genealogies in the Bible. Genealogies are frequently mentioned throughout Scripture, highlighting the significance of tracing ancestral lines and preserving historical records. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 25 verse 4 provides a brief account of the sons of Abraham and Keturah, emphasizing the continuation of Abraham's lineage and God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. While these sons do not play a prominent role in the overall biblical narrative, their inclusion serves to acknowledge the broader scope of God's blessings and the importance of preserving genealogical records. Genesis chapter 25 verse 5. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. Genesis chapter 25 verse 5 is a concise verse that captures a significant event in the life of Abraham, the patriarch of the Israelites, and his son Isaac. This verse reveals Abraham's act of passing on his inheritance and possessions to his beloved son, Isaac. To understand the context of this verse, let's explore the preceding events. In Genesis chapter 24, Abraham sends his servant on a mission to find a wife for Isaac. The servant successfully finds Rebekah, who becomes Isaac's wife and brings her back to Canaan. This event showcases Abraham's commitment to securing a godly and suitable partner for his son, Isaac. Now, in Genesis chapter 25 verse 5, we witness another act of Abraham's faithfulness and obedience to God. It states that Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. This act of passing on his inheritance is a significant demonstration of Abraham's faith in God's promise to bless his descendants. It signifies Abraham's recognition that Isaac is the chosen heir and the one through whom God's covenant promises would be fulfilled. This verse teaches us several important lessons: faithfulness and obedience. Abraham's willingness to pass on all his possessions to Isaac exemplifies his faithfulness and obedience to God. Abraham trusted in God's promise and acted accordingly, ensuring that the blessings would continue through Isaac. It reminds us of the importance of faithfully following God's instructions and trusting in his plans. Stewardship. Abraham recognized that everything he possessed was a gift from God. By passing on his inheritance to Isaac, he acknowledged that he was merely a steward of the blessings God had bestowed upon him. As believers, we are called to be good stewards of the resources and blessings entrusted to us, using them wisely and for God's purposes. God's covenant faithfulness. This verse serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness in fulfilling his covenant promises. God had promised to bless Abraham and make him the father of many nations. By entrusting all he had to Isaac, Abraham demonstrated his confidence that God's covenant would continue through his son. It encourages us to trust in God's faithfulness, even when his promises may seem distant or uncertain. Overall, Genesis chapter 25 verse 5 portrays Abraham's act of passing on his inheritance to Isaac as a testament to his faithfulness, obedience, and trust in God's covenant promises. It serves as a reminder to us of the importance of faithfully following God's leading, being good stewards of his blessings, and trusting in his faithfulness throughout our lives. Genesis chapter 25 verse 6. But unto the sons of the concubines, which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent him away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived, eastward, unto the east country. This verse is a part of the narrative describing the later years of Abraham's life. Here are some key points to consider in this passage. Abraham's concubines. The verse mentions that Abraham had concubines, who were secondary wives or female companions. It is important to note that having concubines was a common practice in ancient times. However, the Bible does not endorse or promote this practice. Abraham's primary wife was Sarah, and his son Isaac was the child of the promise. Abraham's gifts. The verse states that Abraham gave gifts to the sons of his concubines. It is unclear what these gifts were, but they were likely tokens of provision and inheritance. Abraham's intention was to provide for his other sons while ensuring that Isaac, the child of promise and the one through whom God's covenant would be fulfilled, received his rightful inheritance. Sent him away. Abraham sent his concubines' sons away from Isaac while he was still alive. This action was likely to avoid potential conflicts and ensure the clear inheritance and blessing of Isaac as the chosen heir. This decision also shows Abraham's wisdom in managing potential rivalries and divisions among his offspring. Eastward, unto the east country, the sons of Abraham's concubines were sent eastward, to the east country. The specific location is not explicitly mentioned, but it signifies their separation from Isaac and his family. This geographical distance would help maintain the distinction between Isaac's descendants, the Israelites, and the descendants of Abraham's other sons. Lessons and applications: God's faithfulness to his promises. Despite Abraham having other sons through his concubines, God's covenant and promise were specifically tied to Isaac. This highlights God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises and his sovereignty in choosing the lineage through which the Messiah would come. Responsibility in family matters. Abraham's actions reflect his sense of responsibility in ensuring the proper distribution of his resources and the clear lineage for God's covenant. This teaches us the importance of managing family matters wisely, considering both material and spiritual inheritance. Resolving potential conflicts. Abraham's decision to separate Isaac from his half-brothers demonstrates his wisdom in resolving potential conflicts within his family. It serves as a reminder to address conflicts proactively and seek peaceful solutions in our own family relationships. God's grace towards all descendants. Although Isaac was the chosen son of promise, God's love and grace extended to all of Abraham's descendants. The Bible later records how God blessed and provided for Abraham's other sons as well. Remember, studying the Bible involves exploring the broader context, historical background, and connecting with other related verses to gain a deeper understanding. Genesis chapter 25 verse 7. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 160 years. Genesis chapter 25 verse 7 provides us with information about the lifespan of Abraham, the patriarch of the Israelite nation and a significant figure in the Bible. Let's delve deeper into this verse and explore its context and meaning within the broader biblical narrative. Abraham's life and significance. Abraham, originally known as Abram, is one of the most important figures in the Bible. He is revered as the father of the Jewish people and is considered a prominent figure in Christianity and Islam as well. God called Abraham out of his homeland and made a covenant with him, promising to bless him and make his descendants a great nation. Through Abraham's lineage, God established his chosen people, the Israelites, and ultimately fulfilled his divine plan of salvation through Jesus Christ. The duration of Abraham's life. Genesis chapter 25 verse 7 informs us that Abraham lived for 115 years. This means that Abraham lived for 175 years. The Bible often provides specific details regarding the ages and lifespans of key individuals, emphasizing their significance within God's unfolding plan. Numerical symbolism. In biblical literature, numbers are often used symbolically. The number 175 does not have a particular symbolic significance in this context, but it serves as an important historical marker, emphasizing the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. It highlights the long and blessed life that Abraham enjoyed as a result of his faith and obedience. Lessons and applications. Faith and obedience. Abraham's life teaches us the importance of faith and obedience to God. He left his homeland and embarked on a journey into the unknown, trusting in God's promises. His willingness to follow God's leading and his faith in God's faithfulness were key aspects of his relationship with the Lord. God's faithfulness. Abraham's long life is a testament to God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. Despite Abraham's initial old age and lack of children, God provided him with a son, Isaac, in his old age. Abraham's prolonged life allowed him to witness God's faithfulness firsthand and experience the fulfillment of his covenant promises. Legacy and blessing. Abraham's descendants, through his son Isaac and grandson Jacob, grew into a great nation. God's blessings upon Abraham extended to future generations, highlighting the importance of generational blessings and the enduring impact of faithfulness to God. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 25 verse 7 provides a glimpse into the lifespan of Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation. It emphasizes the fulfillment of God's promises and highlights the significance of faith, obedience, and God's faithfulness. Abraham's life serves as an inspiration to believers, encouraging them to trust in God's promises and walk faithfully with Him. Genesis chapter 25 verse 8. Then Abraham gave up the ghost, and died in a good old age, an old man, and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Context and background: Genesis chapter 25 verse 8 marks the end of Abraham's life. Abraham is a significant figure in the Bible and is often referred to as the father of faith. God called Abraham out of his homeland, promising to make him a great nation and bless all the families of the earth through him. Throughout his life, Abraham experienced numerous trials, received promises from God, and demonstrated unwavering faith. Abraham's death. In this verse, it is stated that Abraham gave up the ghost, or breathed his last breath, indicating his physical death. The passage describes his death as occurring in a good old age, suggesting that he lived a long and fulfilling life. Abraham died as an old man, having experienced the fulfillment of some of God's promises, including the birth of his son Isaac, who was the child of promise. Gathering to his people. The verse also mentions that Abraham was gathered to his people. This phrase implies that Abraham was reunited with his ancestors in death. It highlights the belief in the afterlife and the continuity of relationships beyond physical life. Abraham's faith in God had an eternal dimension, and his death marked a transition to a different realm where he would be reunited with his loved ones who had passed away before him. Reflections on Abraham's life. Abraham's life is a testament to faith, obedience, and trust in God. Despite facing various challenges and uncertainties, he remained faithful and followed God's instructions. God made a covenant with Abraham, promising him descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, a land to call his own, and blessings for all nations through his offspring. Abraham's faith in God's promises serves as an example for believers today. Lessons for believers: faith and obedience. Abraham's life teaches us the importance of faith and obedience. He believed in God's promises even when they seemed impossible, and he obeyed God's instructions without question. As believers, we are called to trust in God's faithfulness, even in difficult circumstances, and obey His commands. A life of purpose. Abraham's life demonstrates that God has a purpose and plan for each person. Abraham's faithfulness to God's calling resulted in blessings not only for himself but for generations to come. We should seek to discover and fulfill God's purpose for our lives, knowing that our actions can impact future generations. The hope of eternal life. Abraham's gathering to his people reminds us of the hope of eternal life in Christ. As believers, we have the assurance that death is not the end but a transition to a glorious reunion with loved ones and with God Himself. Genesis chapter 25 verse 8 provides a brief but significant account of Abraham's death and his eternal destiny. It encourages us to reflect on the legacy of faith left by Abraham and inspires us to live a life of faith, obedience, and hope in the promises of God. Genesis chapter 25 verse 9. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre. This verse is part of the account of Abraham's death and burial. Here are a few key points to consider. Context: Genesis chapter 25 verse 9 marks the conclusion of Abraham's life and the beginning of the focus on Isaac and Ishmael, his two sons. Abraham had played a significant role in God's plan, being chosen as the father of a great nation and the recipient of divine promises. The cave of Machpelah. Abraham was buried in the cave of Machpelah, which was located in the field of Ephron the Hittite. This cave was a burial site that Abraham had purchased earlier for Sarah's burial. Genesis chapter 23 verses 16 through 20. The fact that Abraham's sons, Isaac and Ishmael, united in burying their father in this cave, shows a moment of reconciliation between them. Isaac and Ishmael. Isaac, the promised son of Abraham and Sarah, is often portrayed as the child of the covenant and the one through whom God's promises would be fulfilled. On the other hand, Ishmael was Abraham's son through Hagar, Sarah's maidservant. Though Ishmael was not the child of the covenant, he was still Abraham's son, and his presence and involvement in the burial show a measure of respect and unity between the brothers. Unity and reconciliation. The burial of Abraham by both Isaac and Ishmael demonstrates a significant act of unity and reconciliation. Despite the complexities and tensions in their family history, they set aside their differences to honor their father together. This event foreshadows a broader theme in the Bible, highlighting the importance of unity and reconciliation among God's people. God's faithfulness. Genesis chapter 25 verse 9 serves as a reminder of God's faithfulness to His promises and His chosen people. Despite the passing of Abraham, the covenant promises would continue through Isaac and his descendants, who would become the nation of Israel. God's plan was unfolding according to His sovereign purposes. As you reflect on Genesis chapter 25 verse 9, consider the themes of unity, reconciliation, and God's faithfulness to His promises. This verse provides a glimpse into the lives of Isaac and Ishmael, as well as the continuation of God's plan for His people. Genesis chapter 25 verse 10. The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth, there was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. Genesis chapter 25 verse 10 provides us with a significant detail regarding the burial of Abraham and Sarah, the prominent figures in the Old Testament. Let's explore the context and themes related to this verse. Context. Genesis chapter 25 recounts the events following Abraham's life and the introduction of his descendants. Prior to this verse, Abraham passed away at the age of 175, and his son Isaac, along with Ishmael, his other sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah. The verse specifically focuses on the burial site and mentions Abraham's purchase of the field from the sons of Heth, who were the local inhabitants of the land. Themes: faithfulness and promises. Genesis chapter 25 verse 10 highlights the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. God had promised Abraham that the land he dwelled in would belong to his descendants. Genesis chapter 12 verse 7. By purchasing the field, Abraham not only secured a burial place for himself and Sarah, but also took a step towards possessing the land that God had promised to him. Continuity and legacy. The burial of Abraham and Sarah in the promised land signifies the continuation of their legacy. It emphasizes their deep connection to the land and their identity as the chosen recipients of God's blessings. By being laid to rest in the land, Abraham and Sarah become a symbol of the covenant God made with them, which would extend to future generations. Respect and honor. Abraham's burial in the land he purchased demonstrates the respect and honor accorded to him and Sarah. In ancient times, owning a burial site was a significant indication of status and importance. By securing a burial place for himself and Sarah, Abraham ensured their dignity and established a lasting memorial to their lives. God's sovereignty. While the focus is on Abraham's burial, this verse subtly reminds us of God's sovereignty and providence throughout the narrative. God's promises to Abraham were ultimately fulfilled through his guidance and direction. Abraham's burial in the land he acquired serves as a testament to God's faithfulness and control over the events leading to the fulfillment of his plans. Application. Genesis chapter 25 verse 10 encourages believers to reflect on the faithfulness of God and His promises. Just as Abraham and Sarah trusted in God's word, we are called to place our faith in His promises and rely on His providence. Additionally, this verse prompts us to consider the legacy we leave behind. How are we honoring God's faithfulness in our lives? How can we contribute to the continuation of God's work in future generations? Furthermore, Genesis chapter 25 verse 10 highlights the significance of honoring and respecting others, even in their passing. It reminds us to treat others with dignity, both in life and death, as every individual bears the image of God. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 25 verse 10 provides a glimpse into the burial of Abraham and Sarah, underscoring their faithfulness, God's promises, and the importance of respect and honor. By exploring this verse in its context and examining its themes, we can glean valuable lessons and apply them to our own lives. Genesis chapter 25 verse 11. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham, that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt by the well Lahai-roi. Genesis chapter 25 verse 11 marks a transition in the narrative from the life of Abraham to the focus on his son Isaac. In this verse, we learn about the blessing of Isaac by God and his dwelling place near a well called Lahai-roi. Let's delve deeper into the significance of this verse and explore its broader context within the book of Genesis. The death of Abraham. The verse begins by stating that this event occurred after the death of Abraham. Abraham played a crucial role in the biblical narrative as the father of the Israelite people and a significant figure in God's redemptive plan. His death marked a significant transition in the story, shifting the focus to the next generation and the fulfillment of God's promises. The blessing of Isaac. Following Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac. The blessing of Isaac reaffirmed the covenant promise that God made with Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 verses 2 and 3, where God promised to make him a great nation and bless all the families of the earth through him. By bestowing his blessing upon Isaac, God ensured the continuation of his covenant and the fulfillment of his divine plan. Dwelling by the well Lahai-roi, the verse concludes by mentioning that Isaac dwelt by the well Lahai-roi. This well holds symbolic significance and carries a historical context. Lahai-roi means, the well of the living one who sees me. This well was previously mentioned in Genesis chapter 16 verse 14 when Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, encountered the angel of the Lord near this well. It was a place of divine encounter and revelation. By dwelling near the well Lahai-roi, Isaac was situated in a location with historical and spiritual significance. It also emphasized God's presence and provision for Isaac as he embarked on his own journey. It served as a reminder that God, who sees all things, was with Isaac and would guide him throughout his life. Overall, Genesis chapter 25 verse 11 highlights the transition of the narrative from Abraham to Isaac, the blessing bestowed upon Isaac by God, and the significant location of Isaac's dwelling. It establishes the continuity of God's promises and emphasizes his faithfulness to the covenant established with Abraham. Genesis chapter 25 verse 12. Now these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's handmaid, bare unto Abraham. This verse introduces the passage that follows, which presents the genealogy of Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar. In this study, we can explore some key aspects of this verse and its context. Background. To understand Genesis chapter 25 verse 12, it is helpful to look at the preceding events. Abraham and his wife Sarah had been unable to have children for many years, but God had promised them descendants. At Sarah's suggestion, Abraham fathered a child with Hagar, Sarah's Egyptian maidservant. This child was named Ishmael. Generations. The verse begins with the phrase, "Now these are the generations." This phrase indicates that the following information will provide a lineage or genealogy of Ishmael. The Bible often uses this phrase to denote a record of family history or a list of descendants. Ishmael. The verse identifies Ishmael as Abraham's son. This emphasizes his connection to Abraham and establishes his importance within the context of the biblical narrative. Ishmael holds a significant place in the lineage of Abraham, as he became the father of 12 princes and a great nation, fulfilling God's promise to make him fruitful, Genesis chapter 17 verse 20. Parentage. The verse specifies that Ishmael's mother is Hagar, an Egyptian and Sarah's maidservant. This information highlights the complex family dynamics and the consequences of Abraham and Sarah's attempt to fulfill God's promise through their own methods. The story of Ishmael and his descendants is intertwined with the larger narrative of God's plan for Abraham's family. Contextual significance. This verse sets the stage for further exploration of Ishmael's life and descendants, which are described in subsequent verses. The inclusion of Ishmael's genealogy reveals God's faithfulness to his promise to Abraham, as the lineage of Ishmael reflects the fulfillment of God's word. Overall, Genesis chapter 25 verse 12 provides a brief introduction to the genealogy of Ishmael, emphasizing his connection to Abraham and his mother Hagar. It serves as a stepping stone for the narrative that follows, illustrating God's fulfillment of his promises and the intricate dynamics within Abraham's family. It's important to note that further study and exploration of the surrounding verses and the entire book of Genesis can provide additional insights and a deeper understanding of the significance of Ishmael's lineage within the broader biblical narrative. Genesis chapter 25 verse 13. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names, according to their generations, the firstborn of Ishmael, Nebajoth, and Kedar, and Adbeel, and Mibzam. Context and background. Genesis chapter 25 verse 13 is part of the genealogical record of Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar. This verse provides a list of Ishmael's sons and their names. Understanding the broader context helps us appreciate the significance of these names and their place in God's plan. Ishmael and his descendants. Ishmael was the firstborn son of Abraham through Hagar, Sarah's Egyptian maidservant. Although he was not the child of promise, Isaac was. God still blessed Ishmael and promised to make him a great nation. Genesis chapter 17 verse 20. Ishmael became the father of 12 sons, and these sons formed 12 tribes that eventually became Arab peoples. The descendants of Ishmael have played a significant role in history and continue to exist to this day. The names of Ishmael's sons. Nebajoth. Nebajoth, meaning heights or elevated, is the firstborn of Ishmael mentioned in the genealogy. The name suggests a connection to prominence or exaltation. Kedar. Kedar means dark or black, and it is associated with nomadic tribes inhabiting the Arabian deserts. In the Bible, Kedar is mentioned as a symbol of strength and wealth. Isaiah chapter 21 verse 13, Song of Solomon chapter 1 verse 5. Adbeel. The meaning of Adbeel is uncertain. There is limited information available about Adbeel and his descendants. Mibzam. Mibzam means fragrance or sweet odor. It signifies pleasantness and may suggest a blessing or favor from God. Lessons and applications. God's blessing on Ishmael. Even though Ishmael was not the child of promise, God still blessed him and his descendants. This highlights God's faithfulness and his plan for all nations and peoples. It teaches us that God's blessings are not limited to specific individuals or lineages, but extend to all who trust in him. God's sovereign plan. The names of Ishmael's sons reveal that God has a purpose for each individual and group. Despite any disadvantages or challenges we may face, God can use us according to his sovereign plan. Understanding cultural diversity. The descendants of Ishmael, through these named sons, formed diverse tribes and nations. This passage reminds us of the beauty and value of cultural diversity, as God's plan encompasses people from every nation and ethnicity. Appreciating God's grace. Ishmael and his descendants received blessings and favor from God, despite their imperfect lineage. This demonstrates God's grace and reminds us that salvation and blessings are not based on our merits but are gifts from God. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 25 verse 13 provides a record of Ishmael's sons and their names, signifying God's faithfulness, his sovereign plan, and the value of cultural diversity. It reminds us that God blesses and works through individuals and groups according to his purpose, and his grace extends to all who trust in him. Genesis chapter 25 verse 14. And Mishma, and Duma, and Massa. Genesis chapter 25 verse 14 is part of a genealogical list found in the book of Genesis, which details the descendants of Abraham through his wife Keturah. In this verse, the names of 3 sons of Ishmael are mentioned, Mishma, Duma, and Massa. To better understand the significance of this verse, it is important to consider the broader context. Genesis chapter 25 verses 1 through 6 provides an account of Abraham's later years and the children he fathered with Keturah after the death of his wife Sarah. These sons, along with Ishmael, were sent away by Abraham to the east while he was still alive, giving them their own inheritance apart from Isaac, the promised son. Now, let's briefly explore the names mentioned in Genesis chapter 25 verse 14. Mishma. Mishma was one of the sons of Ishmael and a grandson of Abraham. The name Mishma means hearing or obedience. While not much else is known about him, this name could suggest the importance of attentive listening and obedience to God's commands. Duma. Duma is another son of Ishmael. The name Duma means silence or stillness. This name might convey the idea of contemplation, introspection, or even a state of waiting in silence before God. Massa. Massa is the third son of Ishmael. The name Massa means burden or tribute. It is possible that this name reflects the idea of responsibility or carrying a burden. It could also refer to the notion of offering tribute or worship to God. While these names may not have extensive narratives or specific events associated with them in the biblical text, they do provide us with insights into the cultural and linguistic context of the time. Each name carries its own significance and could serve as a reminder of certain principles or values held by the people of that period. As we explore the Bible, it's important to remember that not every verse contains explicit teachings or narratives. Some verses, like Genesis chapter 25 verse 14, offer glimpses into historical and genealogical details that help us understand the broader narrative and context of the biblical story. Genesis chapter 25 verse 15. Hadar, and Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. This verse is part of a genealogical account found in Genesis chapter 25 verses 1 through 18, which records the descendants of Abraham through his wife Keturah. In these verses, the Bible provides a brief listing of the sons and grandsons of Abraham and Keturah, who were born after the death of Sarah. Genesis chapter 25 verse 15 specifically mentions the names of 5 sons: Hadar, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These names represent various Arabian tribes or regions that were descendants of Abraham. The mention of these descendants is significant in understanding the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham regarding the multiplication of his descendants. While this verse may seem relatively straightforward, it is important to note that the significance of this passage lies in the broader context of the Abrahamic covenant and the fulfillment of God's promises throughout the book of Genesis. The Abrahamic covenant, established in Genesis chapter 12 verses 1 through 3, was a promise from God to Abraham that he would become the father of a great nation and that through him, all nations would be blessed. This covenant was reaffirmed to Abraham multiple times throughout his life and played a vital role in the unfolding of God's redemptive plan for humanity. As we examine Genesis chapter 25 verse 15 within the larger context of the Abrahamic covenant, we see that it serves as a testament to God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. Despite Sarah's barrenness and the numerous challenges Abraham faced, he ultimately became the father of many nations. The mention of these descendants in Genesis chapter 25 verse 15 highlights the fulfillment of God's promise and the continued multiplication of Abraham's lineage. It is also worth noting that the descendants mentioned in this verse, particularly those associated with Arabian tribes, have historical significance. The names Hadar and Tema, for example, are associated with cities or regions located in the Arabian Peninsula. This suggests that these tribes or regions developed from the descendants of Abraham, which further validates the historical accuracy of the biblical account. In summary, Genesis chapter 25 verse 15 provides a glimpse into the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham by mentioning the names of his descendants through Keturah. This verse underscores God's faithfulness in multiplying Abraham's descendants and highlights the historical significance of these tribes or regions in the Arabian Peninsula. Ultimately, it serves as a testament to God's faithfulness in fulfilling his covenant with Abraham. Genesis chapter 25 verse 16. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names, by their towns, and by their castles, 12 princes according to their nations. Context: Genesis chapter 25 verse 16 is part of the genealogical account of Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar. Ishmael's descendants are listed in this verse, emphasizing the fulfillment of God's promise to make Ishmael a great nation. Genesis chapter 17 verse 20. Key points: Ishmael's sons. Genesis chapter 25 verses 13 through 15 provides a detailed account of Ishmael's 12 sons and their settlements. These sons became the heads of 12 tribes, forming distinct nations. Princes. The term princes refers to the leaders or chieftains of these 12 tribes. This indicates that Ishmael's descendants were organized under a hierarchical structure, with each tribe having its own leader. Nations. Genesis chapter 25 verse 16 emphasizes that the 12 princes corresponded to 12 nations. This signifies the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham that Ishmael would become a great nation. Genesis chapter 17 verse 20. Spiritual lessons. God's faithfulness. Despite Ishmael being born from a union outside of God's intended plan, Abraham's union with Hagar, God remained faithful to his promise to bless Ishmael and make him a great nation. This highlights God's faithfulness even in complex family situations. Sovereignty of God. The growth and establishment of 12 nations from Ishmael's descendants demonstrate God's sovereign control over history and his ability to fulfill his promises. God's plans and purposes extend beyond human limitations and shortcomings. Importance of lineage. The detailed account of Ishmael's descendants underscores the significance of lineage in biblical history. Genealogies play a crucial role in establishing the historical and prophetic connections within God's plan for humanity. Application. Trust in God's promises. Like Ishmael, we can trust that God is faithful to his promises. Even if circumstances or human decisions complicate our journey, God can bring about his purposes in our lives. Recognition of God's sovereignty. Reflect on the fact that God is in control of the course of history. Trust that he is working out his plans and purposes, both in your life and in the world around you. Appreciation for spiritual heritage. Consider the importance of your spiritual heritage and the legacy you pass on to future generations. Recognize the influence of godly ancestors and the significance of staying faithful to God's calling. Remember, studying the Bible not only involves understanding the historical and contextual aspects but also applying its principles to our lives. May this study help you gain insights into God's faithfulness, sovereignty, and the importance of lineage in his redemptive plan. Genesis chapter 25 verse 17. And these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people. Context. Genesis chapter 25 verse 17 is a brief verse that provides information about the lifespan and death of Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar. It serves as a summary statement about Ishmael's life before the narrative continues with the focus on Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah. Ishmael's life. Ishmael was born to Abraham through Hagar, Sarah's maidservant, as a result of Sarah's inability to conceive. Although he was not the child of promise, Ishmael was still a significant figure in the biblical narrative. His birth created tension in Abraham's family, and his descendants would become the Ishmaelites, known for their nomadic lifestyle. Length of life. Genesis chapter 25 verse 17 states that Ishmael lived for 137 years. While this verse provides a specific duration for Ishmael's life, it does not provide further details about his experiences or achievements during that time. It primarily serves as a marker for the conclusion of Ishmael's story. Death and gathering. The verse mentions that Ishmael gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people. This language indicates that Ishmael's life came to an end, and he joined his ancestors in death. The phrase, gathered unto his people, suggests a belief in an afterlife or a communal gathering of departed souls. Lessons from Ishmael's life. Although Ishmael's story is relatively brief, it offers some valuable insights. First, it highlights the consequences of Abraham and Sarah's attempt to fulfill God's promise through their own means. Ishmael's birth resulted from their lack of faith in God's timing. Second, Ishmael's life illustrates the complexities and challenges that arise when human decisions and emotions intersect with God's plans. His story serves as a reminder to trust in God's promises and timing rather than relying on our own understanding. In summary, Genesis chapter 25 verse 17 provides a concise overview of Ishmael's life, stating his age at death and his passing into the afterlife. While the verse does not delve into the details of Ishmael's life, it reminds us of the importance of trusting in God's timing and faithfulness rather than seeking our own solutions. Genesis chapter 25 verse 18. And they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, that is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Assyria, and he died in the presence of all his brethren. Context: Genesis chapter 25 verse 18 is part of the genealogy of Ishmael, the son of Abraham and Hagar. This verse briefly describes the dwelling place and the death of Ishmael. Dwelling from Havilah unto Shur. Havilah and Shur are geographical references. Havilah was an area known for its rich resources, mentioned in Genesis chapter 2 verse 11, where it is described as having gold, bdellium, and onyx stones. Shur, on the other hand, was a region located on the eastern border of Egypt. This verse indicates that Ishmael and his descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, which implies they lived in the wilderness region between Egypt and Assyria. Ishmael's death. The verse states that Ishmael died in the presence of all his brethren. This suggests that Ishmael's death was witnessed by his family members, including his 12 sons who were mentioned in the previous verses, Genesis chapter 25 verses 12 through 16. The significance of highlighting this detail is unclear, but it emphasizes the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham regarding Ishmael's descendants, Genesis chapter 17 verse 20, and the continuation of his lineage. Lessons and applications. God's faithfulness. Despite Ishmael being born through a complicated situation involving Sarah's maidservant Hagar, God still promised to bless Ishmael and make him a great nation, Genesis chapter 17 verse 20. The fact that Ishmael lived a fulfilling life and had many descendants reflects God's faithfulness to his promises. It reminds us that God's plans and promises are not limited by human circumstances. God's sovereignty over life and death. The mention of Ishmael's death reminds us of the brevity and fragility of human life. It also reinforces the truth that God is sovereign over life and death. Every individual's lifespan is determined by God, and our time on earth should be used wisely to fulfill God's purposes and seek His will. Family and community. The phrase, "in the presence of all his brethren," suggests the importance of family and community. Ishmael's death impacted his family members, and they were witnesses to this event. It serves as a reminder of the significance of familial relationships and the importance of supporting and caring for one another. Understanding genealogies. Genealogies in the Bible often serve as a record of historical lineages and a way to trace the fulfillment of God's promises. While it may seem less significant on the surface, studying genealogies can provide insights into God's redemptive plan and the continuity of His covenantal promises throughout generations. Remember, studying a verse in isolation might not provide a complete understanding of its context. It is beneficial to explore the surrounding verses and chapters to gain a comprehensive grasp of the biblical narrative. Genesis chapter 25 verse 19. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac. This verse serves as an introductory statement to the account of Isaac's descendants and marks the beginning of a new section within the book of Genesis. Here, we are reminded of the lineage of Isaac, who was the promised son of Abraham and the one through whom God's covenant blessings would continue. Context. The book of Genesis provides an account of the beginnings of the world, humanity, and the establishment of God's chosen people, Israel. In Genesis chapter 25, the focus shifts to the descendants of Abraham, particularly Isaac and his family. Importance of Isaac. Isaac was born to Abraham and Sarah in their old age, miraculously fulfilling God's promise to give them a son. Isaac was not only a physical descendant of Abraham but also a crucial link in God's plan of salvation. God had chosen Isaac to carry on the covenant promises and ultimately become part of the lineage leading to the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Generations of Isaac. The phrase, generations of Isaac, refers to the descendants or family line of Isaac. In the subsequent verses, Genesis continues to trace the lineage of Isaac through his twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Abraham begat Isaac. This phrase emphasizes the direct lineage of Isaac, emphasizing that Isaac was the biological son of Abraham. The mention of Isaac's father, Abraham, serves as a reminder of God's covenant with Abraham and the fulfillment of his promise in the birth of Isaac. Covenant promises. Throughout the book of Genesis, God made several promises to Abraham, including the covenant of land, descendants, and blessings. Genesis chapter 12 verses 1 through 3, Genesis chapter 17 verses 1 through 8. These promises were passed down to Isaac, and they played a significant role in the unfolding narrative of the Bible. In summary, Genesis chapter 25 verse 19 serves as an introduction to the account of Isaac's descendants and highlights the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. It reminds us of Isaac's important role in God's plan of redemption and the continuation of the covenant promises through him. This verse sets the stage for the subsequent events and reveals God's faithfulness to his chosen people. Genesis chapter 25 verse 20. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Paddan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. Context. The book of Genesis provides an account of the origins of the world and the early history of humanity. In this particular verse, we are introduced to Isaac, the son of Abraham, and the circumstances surrounding his marriage to Rebekah. Isaac's age. The verse states that Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. This detail indicates that Isaac had reached an age where he was ready for marriage and taking on the responsibilities of adulthood. It also highlights the passage of time since the previous events described in Genesis. Marriage to Rebekah. Isaac's marriage to Rebekah was a significant event in his life. The verse mentions that Rebekah was the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Paddan Aram and the sister of Laban. This information helps establish the genealogical background of Rebekah and introduces future important figures in the narrative. Cultural context. In ancient times, marriages were often arranged by the parents or family members. Isaac's marriage to Rebekah followed this tradition. The mention of her lineage serves to emphasize the cultural and familial connections involved in their union. Divine providence. Throughout the book of Genesis, we see God's guidance and providence in the lives of the patriarchs and their families. The fact that Isaac's marriage to Rebekah is recorded in Scripture implies that it held significance within God's overall plan for the descendants of Abraham. Future implications. Isaac and Rebekah's marriage lays the foundation for the continuation of God's covenant promise to Abraham. Through their union, the line of promise and blessing would be carried forward, leading to the birth of their twin sons, Jacob and Esau, who would play significant roles in the narrative of Genesis. Overall, Genesis chapter 25 verse 20 provides us with important details about Isaac's marriage to Rebekah, including their ages and their familial background. It sets the stage for the subsequent events that unfold within the larger narrative of God's plan for his people. Genesis chapter 25 verse 21. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. This verse is a significant moment in the narrative of the book of Genesis and provides insights into the faith of Isaac and the power of God's intervention in human circumstances. Let's delve into this verse and its context to better understand its significance. Genesis chapter 25 verse 21 is part of the larger story of Isaac and Rebekah, who were married but faced the challenge of infertility. The verse highlights Isaac's concern for his wife's barrenness and his decision to turn to the Lord in prayer. Isaac's act of entreating the Lord implies that he earnestly and fervently sought God's intervention. Isaac's prayer reveals his faith in God's ability to overcome their predicament. Despite the cultural and emotional implications of infertility in their society, Isaac trusted in the Lord's power to grant them a child. His act of seeking divine assistance demonstrates his reliance on God's provision and his belief that God can change their circumstances. The second part of the verse emphasizes God's response to Isaac's prayer. It states, "And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived." God answered Isaac's prayer and granted Rebekah the ability to conceive. This intervention highlights God's sovereignty over human fertility and his ability to fulfill his promises. The verse portrays God as a compassionate and responsive deity who hears the prayers of his faithful servants. Isaac's intercession on behalf of his wife demonstrates the power of prayer and the impact it can have on the course of events. God's favorable response to Isaac's plea serves as a reminder that God is actively involved in the lives of his people and is willing to intervene in their circumstances. This verse also foreshadows the fulfillment of God's covenant promises to Abraham, Isaac's father. The promise of descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, Genesis chapter 15 verse 5, is one of the key aspects of God's covenant with Abraham. By answering Isaac's prayer and allowing Rebekah to conceive, God ensures the continuation of the covenant line and the eventual birth of Jacob and Esau, who play significant roles in the history of Israel. In summary, Genesis chapter 25 verse 21 portrays Isaac's act of seeking God's intervention through prayer, highlighting his faith in God's power. God responds to Isaac's plea and blesses Rebekah with conception. This verse emphasizes the importance of prayer, the faithfulness of God, and the fulfillment of his covenant promises. It serves as a reminder that God hears and responds to the prayers of his people, actively intervening in their lives to bring about his purposes. Genesis chapter 25 verse 22, "And the children struggled together within her. And she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord." This verse is part of the narrative describing the story of Isaac and his wife Rebekah. Let's delve into this passage and explore its significance within the broader context of the biblical account. In Genesis chapter 25, we learn that Rebekah, Isaac's wife, was barren and unable to conceive. However, after Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife, she became pregnant with twins. The struggle mentioned in verse 22 refers to the intense movements and conflicts occurring within Rebekah's womb. The phrase, "and the children struggled together within her," is symbolic of the struggle between the two nations that would come from her children, Esau and Jacob. The subsequent verses in Genesis reveal that the twins had distinct personalities and would ultimately have a significant impact on the history of their descendants. Rebekah's response to this struggle is a poignant expression of her confusion and distress. She poses the question, "If it be so, why am I thus?" It reflects her bewilderment over the tumultuous circumstances surrounding her pregnancy. The Hebrew term translated as "thus" suggests a feeling of unease or distress. As a result of her confusion, Rebekah sought guidance from the Lord. The verse concludes by stating, "And she went to inquire of the Lord." This demonstrates Rebekah's deep faith and her recognition that God alone held the answers to her concerns. She sought divine intervention and sought clarity from God regarding the situation. This passage teaches us several important lessons. First, it reminds us that struggles and conflicts are not uncommon in life. Even in the womb, the twins experienced strife, highlighting the reality of human discord. Second, Rebekah's reaction serves as an example of turning to God in times of confusion or distress. Instead of relying on her own understanding, she sought divine guidance. In a broader context, this verse foreshadows the ongoing conflict between the descendants of Esau, Edomites, and Jacob, Israelites. The struggle between these two nations is a recurring theme throughout the Old Testament. Overall, Genesis chapter 25 verse 22 portrays a significant moment in the biblical narrative, shedding light on the struggles within Rebekah's womb and the subsequent impact on the history of the nations that emerged from her children. It also emphasizes the importance of seeking God's guidance when faced with perplexing situations in life. Genesis chapter 25 verse 23. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. This verse is part of the narrative in Genesis that describes the account of the birth of Jacob and Esau, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. It is a significant verse as it highlights God's foreknowledge and his plan for these 2 brothers and their descendants. 2 nations and 2 manner of people. God reveals to Rebekah that there are 2 nations and 2 distinct peoples within her womb. This indicates that Jacob and Esau's descendants will eventually grow into 2 separate nations, each with its own characteristics, culture, and identity. This prophecy foreshadows the birth of the Israelites, Jacob's descendants, and the Edomites, Esau's descendants, who would become distinct peoples with different destinies and relationships with God. The one people shall be stronger. God informs Rebekah that one people, referring to Jacob's descendants, will be stronger than the other, referring to Esau's descendants. This does not necessarily refer to physical strength but may encompass various aspects such as spiritual, social, or political strength. Historically, the Israelites, Jacob's descendants, would indeed become a powerful nation under God's guidance. The elder shall serve the younger. This statement emphasizes a reversal of the traditional birthright and blessing, where the elder son would typically receive a greater inheritance and prominence. In this case, God reveals that the older twin, Esau, would serve the younger twin, Jacob. This prophecy is fulfilled later in the narrative when Jacob, through deception, obtains Esau's birthright and blessing. This verse demonstrates God's sovereign control over human events and his ability to foresee and direct future outcomes. It also highlights God's choice and election, as he designates Jacob as the one through whom his covenant and promises would continue. This verse sets the stage for the subsequent events in the lives of Jacob and Esau, revealing God's unfolding plan for his chosen people. Genesis chapter 25 verse 24. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. This verse is part of the narrative of Isaac and Rebekah, the second generation of the patriarchs in the Old Testament. It highlights an important event in their lives, Rebekah's pregnancy with twins, who would later become the famous brothers Jacob and Esau. Context. To better understand Genesis chapter 25 verse 24, it's essential to consider the broader context of the passage. Genesis chapter 25 verses 19 through 34 provides the background leading up to Rebekah's pregnancy, including Isaac's prayer for children, God's answer, and Rebekah conceiving twins. God's faithfulness. Isaac's prayer for children echoes the promise God made to his father, Abraham, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars. Despite Isaac's and Rebekah's initial barrenness, God remains faithful to his covenant and blesses them with children, fulfilling his promise. Twins in her womb. The verse emphasizes that Rebekah was carrying twins in her womb. This miraculous occurrence holds significance because the birth of twins was relatively rare during that time. The presence of twins in the womb also foreshadows the future struggles and conflict that would arise between Jacob and Esau, as they become 2 distinct nations. Divine providence. God's plan is evident in the birth of these twins. It becomes apparent later in the narrative that God had chosen Jacob, the younger brother, to inherit the birthright and blessing traditionally given to the firstborn. This selection underscores God's sovereignty and his ability to work through unconventional means to accomplish his purposes. Foreshadowing. The presence of twins in Rebekah's womb sets the stage for the ongoing narrative and conflict between Jacob and Esau. Their contrasting personalities, choices, and ultimate destinies play a significant role throughout the book of Genesis, shaping the history of Israel and God's redemptive plan. Application. Trust in God's promises. Isaac's prayer and Rebekah's conception serve as a reminder of God's faithfulness. Like Isaac, we can bring our desires and prayers before God, trusting that He hears and answers in His perfect timing. Recognizing divine providence. Rebekah's pregnancy with twins demonstrates God's providential hand in shaping the course of history. We should remember that God works in mysterious and unexpected ways to fulfill His purposes, even when circumstances seem contrary to our expectations. Understanding God's plan, the birth of Jacob and Esau reveals God's chosen path for their lives. We can learn from this that God has unique plans for each of us and that our obedience and faithfulness are essential in fulfilling His purpose. Dealing with conflict, the narrative of Jacob and Esau reminds us of the consequences of unresolved conflicts within families. It prompts us to seek reconciliation and forgiveness, ultimately relying on God's guidance to navigate difficult relationships. Remember, a comprehensive Bible study would involve examining the broader context, cross-referencing related verses, and exploring additional commentaries to gain a deeper understanding of the passage. Genesis chapter 25 verse 25. And the first came out red, all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. Context: Genesis chapter 25 verse 25 is part of the narrative of the birth of Jacob and Esau, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. The previous verses explained that Rebekah conceived after Isaac prayed to the Lord for her. However, the pregnancy was difficult, with the twins struggling within her. Birth of Esau. In this verse, Esau, the firstborn, is described as coming out red, all over like a hairy garment. Esau's physical appearance at birth is significant because it sets him apart from his brother Jacob. The mention of his redness and hairiness highlights his outward characteristics. Symbolism: Esau's redness and hairiness may carry symbolic meaning. The description of redness might symbolize his connection to the earth, emphasizing his physical nature and vitality. The hairiness could symbolize his ruggedness, strength, or wildness. These characteristics are reflective of Esau's future character and occupation as a skilled hunter and outdoorsman. Name: the verse concludes by stating, "And they called his name Esau." The name Esau means hairy or rough. It is derived from the Hebrew word esav, which shares the same root as the word for hairy. Naming a child in biblical times often held significance and conveyed something about the child's nature or circumstances. Foreshadowing: this verse serves as foreshadowing for the future relationship between Jacob and Esau. Their contrasting appearances at birth hint at their divergent paths and the conflict that will arise between them. The story of Jacob and Esau is marked by rivalry, deception, and ultimately reconciliation, highlighting God's sovereign plan and His ability to work through flawed individuals. Lessons for us: the story of Jacob and Esau reminds us that God's purposes are not always apparent from the beginning. Though Esau's birth might have seemed insignificant at the time, it was a crucial event in God's unfolding plan for redemption and the establishment of the nation of Israel. It teaches us to trust in God's providence, even when circumstances appear uncertain or unfavorable. In summary, Genesis chapter 25 verse 25 provides us with a glimpse into the birth of Esau, highlighting his physical characteristics and the significance of his name. This verse foreshadows the future dynamics between Jacob and Esau and teaches us to trust in God's sovereignty and His ability to work through imperfect situations. Genesis chapter 25 verse 26. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. This verse is part of the narrative in Genesis that describes the birth of Jacob and Esau, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Let's delve into the significance of this verse and its broader context. Genesis chapter 25 verse 26 emphasizes the birth of Jacob and provides insight into the circumstances of his birth. The verse highlights that when Jacob was born, he came out of his mother's womb holding onto the heel of his twin brother, Esau. This detail is significant because it foreshadows the future relationship and dynamic between Jacob and Esau, which would be marked by rivalry and conflict. The name, Jacob, itself is derived from the Hebrew word Yaakov, meaning supplanter, or he who grasps the heel. The name reflects the event described in this verse, where Jacob is depicted as holding onto Esau's heel at birth. The name carries symbolic significance, as it hints at Jacob's character and the role he would play in later events. The verse also provides a chronological detail, stating that Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to Jacob and Esau. This information helps establish the timeline of events and provides context for understanding the subsequent narratives involving Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. The birth of Jacob and Esau and the subsequent events in their lives play a significant role in the overall narrative of the book of Genesis. The conflict and tension between the brothers eventually lead to Jacob acquiring Esau's birthright and blessing through deception, which sets in motion a series of events that shape the destiny of Jacob's descendants, the nation of Israel. Genesis chapter 25 verse 26 serves as a foundational verse for understanding the origin and early life of Jacob. It highlights the unique circumstances surrounding his birth, the symbolic meaning of his name, and the subsequent conflict that arises between him and Esau. The story of Jacob and Esau continues to unfold throughout the book of Genesis, revealing themes of sibling rivalry, divine providence, and the fulfillment of God's promises. Genesis chapter 25 verse 27. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. This verse provides us with a glimpse into the lives of Esau and Jacob, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah, and highlights the contrasting personalities and lifestyles. Esau is described as a cunning hunter, a man of the field. This portrays him as a skillful outdoorsman, adept at hunting and familiar with the wilderness. Esau's primary occupation involved hunting game, which would have provided sustenance for his family. He was a rugged and adventurous individual, living a life closely connected to nature. On the other hand, Jacob is described as a plain man, dwelling in tents. Unlike Esau, Jacob is portrayed as someone who preferred a settled and domesticated lifestyle. He was a man who dwelled in tents, indicating a preference for a more settled and sedentary existence. Jacob's inclination towards a domesticated lifestyle suggests that he was more inclined toward managing flocks and herds, rather than venturing out into the wilderness like his brother Esau. This brief description of Esau and Jacob foreshadows the eventual divergence in their paths and the significant events that unfold in their lives. Their differences in character and lifestyle choices set the stage for future conflicts and struggles between the two brothers. It is important to note that this verse merely provides an introductory glimpse into the characters of Esau and Jacob. As we continue reading through the book of Genesis, we encounter various events that further develop their stories, including the birthright exchange, Jacob's deception to receive the blessing, and their subsequent reconciliation many years later. The account of Esau and Jacob in the book of Genesis offers valuable lessons and insights into the consequences of impulsive decisions, the importance of family relationships, and the sovereignty of God in working through imperfect individuals to accomplish His purposes. It serves as a reminder that God's plan unfolds despite human shortcomings and provides hope for redemption and reconciliation, even in the most challenging circumstances. Genesis chapter 25 verse 28. And Isaac loved Esau, because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. This verse provides insight into the dynamics within Isaac's family, particularly regarding his relationship with his twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Let's delve into this verse and explore its significance. Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, became the father of Esau and Jacob. The verse begins by stating that Isaac loved Esau. One reason for Isaac's affection toward Esau was the fact that Esau was a skillful hunter and provided Isaac with venison. As a hunter, Esau likely possessed qualities that appealed to Isaac, such as physical strength, outdoor expertise, and the ability to provide for his family through hunting. On the other hand, the verse also indicates that Rebekah, Isaac's wife, loved Jacob. It is important to note that this preference did not necessarily imply a lack of love for Esau on Rebekah's part but rather a greater affection for Jacob. The specific reasons for Rebekah's preference for Jacob are not explicitly mentioned in this verse. The differing affections of Isaac and Rebekah towards their sons foreshadow the conflicts and complexities that unfold in the subsequent narrative. These dynamics play a significant role in the story of Jacob and Esau, which continues throughout the book of Genesis. The events following Genesis chapter 25 verse 28 reveal a series of pivotal moments in the lives of Jacob and Esau. For instance, Esau, being the firstborn, held the birthright, a significant privilege in ancient cultures, which included inheriting a double portion of the family's estate and assuming the family's leadership role. However, in a moment of hunger and impulsivity, Esau sold his birthright to Jacob in exchange for a bowl of lentil stew, Genesis chapter 25 verses 29 through 34. Later in the story, Jacob, with the help of Rebekah, deceived Isaac and received his father's blessing intended for Esau, further exacerbating the tension between the brothers, Genesis chapter 27 verses 1 through 40. Genesis chapter 25 verse 28 sets the stage for these pivotal events, highlighting the differing affections and favoritism within Isaac's family. The consequences of these preferences have far-reaching effects on the lives of Jacob and Esau and their descendants. It reminds us of the importance of familial relationships, the impact of favoritism, and the need for honesty and integrity in our dealings with one another. As we study this verse and the subsequent events, we can reflect on the broader themes of God's sovereignty and His ability to work even in situations marked by human frailty and brokenness. Despite the familial conflicts and deceit, God's purposes and promises are ultimately fulfilled through the lives of Jacob and Esau, and the continuation of their story in the book of Genesis reveals God's redemptive plan for His people. Genesis chapter 25 verse 29. And Jacob sowed pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. Genesis chapter 25 verse 29 presents a significant event in the lives of Jacob and Esau, twin brothers who played prominent roles in the history of Israel. Context. Before delving into this particular verse, let's set the context. Jacob and Esau were the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. They were fraternal twins, but with distinct personalities and physical appearances. Esau was the elder brother and a skillful hunter, while Jacob was more inclined towards dwelling in tents and had a cunning nature. The event, in this verse, Jacob is depicted as preparing a meal known as pottage, a type of stew. Meanwhile, Esau returns from the field after an exhausting hunt, and he is famished. Esau's physical condition reveals his hunger and weakness. Symbolism. This verse portrays the stark differences between Jacob and Esau. Jacob, characterized as the cunning and shrewd one, took advantage of Esau's vulnerable state to make a strategic move. He offers Esau a deal in exchange for his birthright as the firstborn son, which included the inheritance and blessing from their father, Isaac. Lessons and applications. The value of priorities. Esau's choice to prioritize immediate physical needs over his birthright serves as a cautionary tale. It highlights the importance of considering long-term consequences rather than making impulsive decisions based solely on present circumstances. God's sovereignty. This account demonstrates how God's sovereign plan was at work even within the imperfect actions of human beings. God had already spoken to Rebekah before the twins were born, stating that the elder would serve the younger, Genesis chapter 25 verse 23. Jacob's actions, though questionable, ultimately aligned with God's plan. Wisdom and discernment. Jacob's actions may raise ethical concerns. While it is important to exercise wisdom and discernment, we should also strive to act with integrity and fairness, considering the well-being and dignity of others. Overall, Genesis chapter 25 verse 29 reveals a pivotal moment in the lives of Jacob and Esau, shedding light on their characters and the consequences of their choices. It serves as a reminder to consider our priorities, trust in God's sovereignty, and strive for wisdom and discernment in our decision-making. Genesis chapter 25 verse 30. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. Context. Genesis chapter 25 verse 30 is part of the narrative describing the relationship between Esau and Jacob, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Esau, the older twin, was entitled to the birthright, which included a special blessing and inheritance. However, in this particular incident, Esau was famished and asked Jacob to give him some of the lentil stew that he was cooking. Symbolism: the red pottage in this verse represents the lentil stew that Jacob was preparing. However, it also holds symbolic significance. The color red is associated with the bloodline, and in this case, it foreshadows the transfer of the birthright from Esau, later known as Edom, to Jacob. This event becomes a pivotal moment in their lives and carries profound consequences for both brothers and the descendants. Esau's impulsiveness. Esau's request for food in this passage reveals his impulsive nature. He prioritizes his immediate physical need and hunger over the long-term implications of his actions. In exchange for satisfying his hunger, he willingly gives up his birthright, underestimating its value and significance. Jacob's opportunism. Jacob, on the other hand, seizes the opportunity presented by Esau's hunger. He takes advantage of his brother's vulnerable state and proposes a trade, lentil stew in exchange for the birthright. Jacob's cunning and opportunistic nature are displayed as he negotiates with Esau, ultimately securing the birthright for himself. Foreshadowing of future events. This passage serves as a foreshadowing of the future struggles and conflicts between the descendants of Esau, Edom, and Jacob, Israel. The rivalry between these two brothers extends beyond their individual lives and continues through generations, shaping the history of their respective nations. Lessons for reflection. Impulsivity can lead to poor decision-making. Esau's impulsive nature caused him to make a hasty and unwise choice. It reminds us to consider the long-term consequences of our actions before acting solely on immediate desires. Opportunism and deceit can lead to negative outcomes. While Jacob's actions were instrumental in securing the birthright, his methods were deceptive. This highlights the importance of integrity and honesty in our dealings with others. God's sovereign plan unfolds even through human weaknesses and mistakes. Despite the flawed actions of Esau and Jacob, God's purpose and plan for their lives and the future of their nations were fulfilled. Genesis chapter 25 verse 30 provides valuable insights into the character traits of Esau and Jacob, their relationship, and the significant consequences that resulted from their choices. It also sets the stage for future events and the fulfillment of God's purpose in the lives of these individuals and their descendants. Genesis chapter 25 verse 31. And Jacob said, "Sell me this day thy birthright." Context: Genesis chapter 25 introduces us to the story of Jacob and Esau, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Esau was the firstborn and thus entitled to the birthright, which included a double portion of the family inheritance and the leadership role within the family. In this verse, Jacob approaches Esau and asks him to sell his birthright. Importance of birthright. The birthright held significant importance in ancient Hebrew culture. It carried spiritual and material blessings and was passed down from the father to the firstborn son. The birthright bestowed upon the recipient a position of honor and responsibility within the family and the community. Jacob's request. Jacob's request to buy Esau's birthright reveals his character and ambition. He saw an opportunity to gain the privileges and blessings associated with the birthright. However, it is essential to note that Esau's attitude towards his birthright played a crucial role in this interaction. Esau's disregard for the birthright. Esau, driven by immediate gratification, did not value the significance of his birthright. In the preceding verses, we learn that Esau returned famished from hunting and demanded food from Jacob. Jacob seized this moment to make a deal, offering a bowl of lentil stew in exchange for Esau's birthright. Esau, without considering the long-term consequences, agreed to the exchange. Jacob's cunning. Jacob's approach may be seen as cunning, taking advantage of his brother's weakness in the moment. However, it is worth noting that Jewish tradition holds that Jacob possessed prophetic insight and understood the potential of the birthright's blessings. This understanding likely motivated Jacob to pursue the opportunity to obtain the birthright. Lessons for us: prioritizing spiritual blessings. Esau's willingness to trade his birthright for a bowl of stew reminds us of the danger of prioritizing immediate desires over spiritual blessings. It serves as a cautionary tale against making hasty decisions that disregard the long-term consequences. Ambition and cunning. Jacob's ambition and tactics raise ethical questions. While we can learn from Jacob's determination, we should also be cautious not to compromise our integrity or exploit others to achieve our goals. Responsibility and honor. The concept of birthright highlights the importance of responsibility and honor within families. It teaches us about the significance of fulfilling our roles with integrity and recognizing the value of our inheritance. God's sovereignty. Despite the actions of Jacob and Esau, God's ultimate plan was not thwarted. His purpose for choosing Jacob over Esau as the one through whom the promised blessings would be fulfilled remained intact. Overall, Genesis chapter 25 verse 31 presents us with a complex story that raises important moral and spiritual questions. It serves as a reminder to value and prioritize spiritual blessings over temporary desires, to act with integrity and responsibility, and to trust in God's sovereignty even when human actions may seem flawed. Genesis chapter 25 verse 32. And Esau said, "Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me?" Context. To fully understand Genesis chapter 25 verse 32, it is essential to consider the broader context. In this passage, we find the account of Esau and Jacob, twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Esau was the firstborn and, as such, was entitled to the birthright, which included a double portion of inheritance and spiritual leadership within the family. Esau's impulsive decision. In this particular verse, Esau returns from hunting and is famished. He finds Jacob cooking a stew and asks for some to satisfy his hunger. Jacob seizes the opportunity and offers to give Esau the stew in exchange for his birthright. Esau, driven by immediate physical need and without considering the long-term implications, makes the impulsive statement in verse 32. Disregard for spiritual heritage. Esau's statement reveals his disregard for the value and significance of the birthright. He was more concerned with his immediate physical needs than with the spiritual blessings and responsibilities associated with the birthright. Esau's mindset was focused on the present and material gain, rather than the long-term consequences and spiritual aspects. Lessons for us. Prioritizing temporary pleasures. Esau's impulsive decision serves as a cautionary tale about prioritizing temporary pleasures over lasting values. It is easy to become consumed by the demands and desires of the present moment, but we should consider the long-term consequences of our choices and decisions. Valuing spiritual heritage. The birthright represented a spiritual heritage passed down through generations. Similarly, as believers, we have a spiritual heritage as children of God. We should cherish and value the blessings and responsibilities that come with our faith, including our relationship with God, His promises, and our calling to live according to His word. Seeking God's will. Esau's decision highlights the importance of seeking God's guidance and will in our lives. He made a hasty decision without consulting God or considering the implications. We should strive to seek God's wisdom, guidance, and direction in all areas of our lives, ensuring that our choices align with His plans for us. Redemption and forgiveness. While Esau's decision had significant consequences, it is worth noting that later in the Bible, we see a picture of redemption and forgiveness between Esau and Jacob. Their story demonstrates that God is merciful and can bring healing and restoration to broken relationships and circumstances. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 25 verse 32 provides valuable insights into the dangers of prioritizing immediate desires over lasting values and the importance of valuing our spiritual heritage. It encourages us to seek God's will and guidance in our lives, recognizing that our choices can have far-reaching consequences. Genesis chapter 25 verse 33. And Jacob said, "Swear to me this day." And he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Context: the verse is part of the narrative about Jacob and Esau, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Esau, the elder twin, was entitled to the birthright, which included both material and spiritual blessings. The birthright. In biblical times, the birthright was a significant privilege granted to the firstborn son. It included a double portion of the father's inheritance, authority over the family, and the role of spiritual leadership. It was a position of great honor and responsibility. Esau's impulsive decision. In this verse, Esau, coming back exhausted from hunting, trades his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of lentil stew. Esau's decision reflects his impulsive and short-sighted nature. He prioritizes immediate gratification over the long-term significance of his birthright. Jacob's shrewdness. Jacob, who desired the birthright, seizes the opportunity when Esau is vulnerable and proposes a deal. By taking advantage of Esau's hunger and weariness, Jacob persuades him to sell his birthright in exchange for a single meal. Lessons to learn. The danger of impulsivity. Esau's hasty decision serves as a warning about the dangers of acting impulsively without considering the long-term consequences. It's essential to exercise self-control and think through our choices, especially in matters of significant importance. Prioritizing eternal values. Esau's disregard for his birthright demonstrates a lack of appreciation for the spiritual blessings associated with it. We should prioritize eternal values over temporary pleasures or worldly possessions. Jesus teaches us to seek first the kingdom of God, Matthew chapter 6 verse 33. Honoring commitments. Although the circumstances surrounding the transaction were questionable, the fact remains that Esau willingly sold his birthright to Jacob. This highlights the importance of honoring our commitments and being people of integrity, even in difficult situations. Consequences of choices. Esau's impulsive decision had lasting consequences. Later in Genesis, we see that Esau regrets his choice but cannot reverse it. Genesis chapter 27 verses 30 to 40. This reminds us that our choices have repercussions, and it is crucial to consider the potential outcomes before making decisions. God's sovereignty. Despite the flawed actions of Jacob and Esau, God's plan for the fulfillment of his promises remained intact. In subsequent events, God works through Jacob's life to bring about his purposes, showing that even when we make mistakes, God can still work through our lives for his glory. Overall, Genesis chapter 25 verse 33 provides valuable lessons about the importance of wise decision-making, prioritizing eternal values, honoring commitments, and recognizing the consequences of our choices. It encourages us to seek God's guidance and exercise discernment in the decisions we make, considering both the immediate and long-term implications. Genesis chapter 25 verse 34. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up, and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. This verse is a part of the narrative in Genesis that recounts the story of Jacob and Esau, who were twin brothers and the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. In this particular passage, we witness an important event that highlights the character of Esau and the consequences of his actions. The story leading up to this verse describes how Esau, after spending time hunting in the field, returned home tired and famished. Upon his arrival, he saw that Jacob had prepared a meal consisting of bread and lentil stew, commonly referred to as pottage. Esau, driven by his immediate physical need and without considering the value of his birthright, requested some of Jacob's food. It is crucial to understand the significance of the birthright in the context of this story. The birthright held a position of great importance within the family, as it entitled the firstborn son to a double portion of the family inheritance, along with other privileges and responsibilities. In Esau's case, as the older twin, he was the rightful heir to this birthright. However, in a moment of impulsive decision-making, Esau disregarded the long-term value and significance of his birthright, choosing to prioritize his immediate hunger over his future blessings. By despising his birthright, he essentially showed contempt or disregard for its worth and sold it for a simple meal. This verse serves as a cautionary tale, teaching us about the consequences of making decisions driven by immediate gratification and failing to consider the long-term implications. Esau's actions demonstrate the danger of prioritizing temporary pleasures over lasting blessings. In the subsequent chapters of Genesis, we see that this decision had lasting repercussions for Esau. Later on, when Isaac was nearing death and sought to bless his sons, Jacob, with the help of his mother, deceived Isaac and received the blessing intended for Esau. Esau, upon realizing what had happened, was filled with bitterness and regret, as he recognized the value of the birthright he had casually discarded. Ultimately, this passage highlights the importance of wise decision-making and the need to consider the long-term consequences of our actions. It encourages us to prioritize enduring blessings over immediate gratification and reminds us of the dangers of despising or undervaluing the things that have lasting significance in our lives.